Meghan encouraged the vengeance. Meghan encouraged the anger and the hatred and seeing enemies and paranoia. That Archie couldn't become a prince because he's got brown skin. Who would have said that? Can you imagine that conversation? Always angry, never content, always complaining. You know, the sooner they go, the better, I think, for Britain.
Tom Bower has just revealed something explosive about Lilibet, and it's huge. A woman has now come forward with a shocking allegation. She claims the Duchess offered money so her daughter could appear in photographs. Yes, you heard that correctly. This raises a question most people avoid asking. What if the child doesn't exist at all? This isn't online gossip or random guessing. A real name is attached. Someone is willing to speak publicly. And once you hear what's been uncovered, you'll see why many believe everything we thought we knew could be wrong. Before we go further, subscribe to FameX, hit like, and drop your thoughts below. What comes next is unbelievable. Let's begin. We need to start with the miscarriage story because this is where the cracks appear. According to the account, the couple left a hospital during a global lockdown. Imagine it, empty streets, silence everywhere. The world completely shut down. They were described walking out carrying a small package, said to be the remains of the loss. It's a powerful image meant to trigger emotion before questions arise. The moment wasn't shared casually. It was described with dramatic, almost movie-like detail. The couple allegedly took the package to a secret sacred place, supposedly a banyan tree. There, beneath the branches, he dug the ground with bare hands and gently buried it. The story hits emotionally before logic steps in. Many people felt it deeply and didn't question it at first. The words were chosen carefully, making doubt feel wrong. But when you step back and look closely, problems start appearing fast. First, banyan trees don't grow where they lived at that time. People familiar with the region have pointed this out. These trees require specific climates and soil. That area doesn't support them. You might think that's minor. Maybe the tree was misnamed. Fine, let's move on. Then there's the hospital issue. During peak lockdowns, hospitals released nothing. Strict COVID protocols were in place. Facilities had tight rules about what could leave the building. You couldn't just walk out with remains like personal items. That's not how medical systems work. Health codes, safety rules, and procedures all forbid it. And that leads to another major problem.
As Prince Charles, the Queen, to keep it cool, but it's just impossible, especially with Harry's memoir about to come out.
Back then, spouses were not allowed in emergency areas. Remember how strict everything was. Partners couldn't enter procedure rooms and weren't allowed inside emergency sections. That was the lockdown reality. So him being present during the moment described simply wouldn't have been allowed. Hospitals did not bend these rules. Limiting contact was critical. But even if you ignore all of that, trees that don't grow there, hospitals not releasing anything, him being present against protocol, there's still another issue. You cannot bury anything on private land without permission. There are laws, permits, health regulations, and official processes that must be followed. Yet according to the story, none of these obstacles mattered. It just happened. Under a tree that shouldn't exist there, after leaving a hospital that wouldn't allow it, with him present when rules forbade it, burying something without legal approval. The entire situation sounds less like reality and more like fiction. It feels dramatic, cinematic, like a scene written for a film. And when people who have actually lived through similar losses heard this story, it didn't feel familiar. Their real pain didn't match what was described. Instead, it felt staged. More like a performance than a genuine experience. Now let's look at the timeline because this is where the numbers stop making sense. Publicly, it was stated the miscarriage happened in July 2020. Okay, noted. Then less than a year later, about 11 months, a full-term daughter was announced. At first glance, it might seem possible, but once you actually calculate it, things fall apart. A full-term pregnancy lasts about 9 months, around 40 weeks. But after a miscarriage, the body needs time to recover before conceiving again. Doctors usually advise waiting 1 to 3 months, sometimes longer depending on circumstances. That recovery time already eats into those 11 months. Even if we're generous and say recovery took only 1 month, that leaves 10 months. A full-term pregnancy still needs 9. That leaves almost no room at all. assuming conception happened immediately, which is rare. Most couples don't conceive on the first. Even if they did, the timeline is dangerously tight. There's no space for delays. And this is where many women started doing their own math when these dates became public.
The same cannot be said about Harry.
Or Harry or Fergie. I mean, Meghan is a consummate survival actress.
People started pulling out calendars, counting backward from the birth announcement, adding recovery time and pregnancy length. Again and again, they reached the same result. The timeline didn't work. Not slightly off, but off by months. Many noted that when you include the recovery period doctors recommend, a realistic conception window, and a full 40-week pregnancy, you need far more than 11 months. What was presented felt squeezed into a window the body usually can't manage. Not fully impossible, but so unlikely it made people stop and stare. But there was more. From the reported loss in July through the pregnancy and into the later stages, she was regularly lifting her toddler son. Anyone who's been pregnant or close to someone who has knows lifting a toddler becomes harder as pregnancy progresses. The weight, the strain, the physical effort all increase. Most doctors advise avoiding heavy lifting during pregnancy, especially later on. And a growing toddler definitely counts as heavy lifting. So imagine it. Recovering from a loss, conceiving almost immediately, carrying a full pregnancy, all while frequently lifting a young child. That's a lot to fit into 11 months, an extremely tight timeline for what the human body normally needs to handle these stages safely. What's interesting is that despite all these questions, despite people doing the math and pointing out the gaps, despite long discussions online, the couple never addressed it. They never clarified dates, never explained how the timeline worked. They simply moved on. A new baby, a new chapter, as if the questions didn't exist. The numbers stayed the same. July 2020 to a full-term baby 11 months later, with recovery, conception, and full gestation somehow fitting into a space barely large enough for pregnancy alone. No matter how generously you arrange those figures, they don't align with biology. Women who have experienced losses and pregnancies looked at these dates and felt something was wrong, because they remember the healing, the waiting, the months involved. What they lived didn't match what was presented. That's why attention turned to what medical professionals were saying, because their voices matter here, and what they pointed out raised even more concerns. Fertility experts reviewed the account and highlighted key facts. At age 39, pregnancy carries serious risks. The chance of loss sits around 30 to 40%.
Goodness is about and all the rest of it. So when Meghan came along into the scene, I just thought, this is fascinating. How is this going to play out?
The risk of chromosomal abnormalities rises to 50 to 60% at that age. These are not small figures. They are major biological realities. Specialists explain that losses at this stage are usually early, often quiet, handled in medical settings. Not dramatic emergency scenes. Not same-day exits with anything taken home. That's not how this typically happens in real medical practice. It's usually clinical, controlled, and private. What drew even more attention was the explanation given for the loss. He publicly suggested media pressure caused it, stress from headlines, lawsuits, and outside forces. Doctors responded quickly because biology doesn't work that way. External stress does not trigger pregnancy loss in the way described. Moving houses doesn't cause it. News stories don't cause it. Lack of sleep doesn't cause it. Medical professionals are very clear. These events are emotionally devastating, yes, but biologically they are usually caused by natural factors beyond anyone's control. Chromosomal issues, developmental problems, biological incompatibility. These are the common reasons, not outside pressure. And this matters deeply. When someone with a huge platform claims media stress caused a pregnancy loss, it sends a harmful message. It suggests blame. That if someone had stayed calmer or avoided pressure, the loss might not have happened. Doctors who work with grieving mothers every day know how damaging that idea is. Many women already carry guilt they don't deserve. They question themselves, wondering if they did something wrong or could have prevented it. The medical community works hard to explain that these losses are almost always biological, not punishment, not triggered by stress or headlines or relocation. So when a public figure links loss to media pressure, specialists worry because it reinforces the exact myth they spend years trying to correct. It makes women believe stress equals loss, when reality is far more complex and out of personal control. Doctors also question other parts of the story. The dramatic hospital exit during strict COVID rules, the overnight discharge, the ability to take remains home, the partner being present despite lockdown restrictions. Every detail clashes with what hospitals were actually doing at that time, what rules were in place, and how medical systems truly functioned during peak pandemic lockdowns.
It was a terrific story and just reflected the opposite of what probably the leakers hoped it would show.
The more medical experts looked into this story, the more inconsistencies appeared. Not tiny mistakes someone could forget, but major biological impossibilities. Things that don't line up with how hospitals operate, how bodies heal, or how pregnancy actually progresses. None of these doctors were being cruel or dismissing grief. They were simply pointing out that what was being shared publicly doesn't match reality. When you tell a story meant to remove stigma, getting the facts wrong can do the opposite. It can create new myths, unnecessary guilt, and false ideas about what causes pregnancy loss. The medical community's message was clear. Grief is real, loss is painful, but spreading misinformation only harms the very women we want to help. Here's where it gets especially telling: the reaction from people who have actually experienced pregnancy loss. When Megan shared her account, thousands responded, and not in the way you might expect. These weren't strangers attacking someone's grief. They were people who had endured loss themselves, who understood the emptiness, the heartbreak, the profound sadness intimately. Reading Megan's story through that lens, what they felt wasn't connection. It was something colder, closer to disbelief. One woman who had suffered multiple losses said it felt gross, in her words. It seemed theatrical, like something sacred had been turned into a performance. She wasn't alone. After reading, many said the details didn't reflect reality. Grief looks different for everyone, but the events described, the medical facts, how it supposedly unfolded, didn't align. Early pregnancy losses don't create dramatic hospital scenes. You don't receive packaged remains to take home. During strict COVID restrictions, partners weren't allowed in examination rooms. The separations were real, painful, and necessary. People went through these losses alone.
And if that comes with risk of losing things, there's a lot that's been lost already.
And then there's the detail about singing lullabies through the pain. Several people noted this felt off, not because grief can't include singing, but because the physical reality of early loss rarely allows for composed responses. The experience is sudden, shocking, physically overwhelming. There's blood, pain, medical intervention, hardly a moment for peaceful singing. Another concern raised was the message being sent. By attributing loss to stress and external pressures, some worried it would make other women feel responsible for their own losses, reinforcing guilt they already carry unnecessarily. Doctors have spent years clarifying that pregnancy loss is rarely anyone's fault, usually unavoidable and seldom caused by something done or not done. A high-profile account suggesting otherwise risks undoing that progress. Readers might think, I was stressed too. Did that cause my loss? Could I have prevented it if I had been calmer? For those already weighed down by grief, that extra burden could be devastating. The recurring theme in these responses was that the narrative didn't feel authentic to lived experience. The emotions might be real, but the logistics, the medical details, the physical realities, didn't match what those who experienced early loss know. Some described it as reading someone's imagined version of loss, rather than a reality-based account. The theatrical elements, the perfectly scripted moments, the dramatic settings, all felt polished, deliberate, too carefully crafted. Perhaps most importantly, many worried about stigma. Instead of normalizing the quiet, private, medically routine nature of early loss, the account presented something dramatic, blameworthy, caused by outside forces rather than biology. This could make the experience seem more shameful, more unusual, more isolating than it actually is. These voices weren't policing grief. They were trying to protect understanding of what pregnancy loss really involves. It's common, biological, and not anyone's fault. That understanding helps healing, not dramatic stories assigning blame. Now, to understand the full picture, we need to look back even further, because questions about these pregnancies start much earlier. Childhood connections begin to matter. Nikki Pretty, one of Meghan's closest friends growing up, not a casual acquaintance but a decades-long friend, stepped forward. She shared information she says came directly from private conversations long before royal life entered the picture. According to Pretty, Meghan had discussed,
capitalize constantly on their royal status to undermine the monarchy from which they're earning their living.
Serious reproductive concerns were present long before any public attention. These weren't casual worries or passing thoughts. They were significant health matters being managed privately. Pretty shared conversations about freezing eggs, which isn't a decision anyone takes lightly. Egg freezing is costly, invasive, and usually only considered when fertility may be at risk. But things get more serious. Pretty also mentioned an endometriosis diagnosis. For those unfamiliar, endometriosis occurs when tissue similar to the uterine lining grows outside the uterus, often making natural conception extremely difficult. Not impossible, but challenging. Many with this condition need interventions, treatments, or sometimes surrogacy. So when Pretty brought this up, eyebrows were raised. If the diagnosis existed long before royal life and was severe enough to warrant egg preservation talks, how did two natural pregnancies occur so easily? How did conception happen so quickly after marriage and again shortly after a loss with no apparent struggle or delay? Pretty didn't stop there. She also referenced a hysterectomy at age 28. A hysterectomy, the surgical removal of the uterus, is a major procedure, making natural pregnancy impossible. She wasn't alone. Another source, remaining anonymous but speaking openly, confirmed similar details. Severe pain, treatments, and decisions that could have impacted her ability to conceive naturally. These weren't vague rumors. They were direct accounts from the past. What makes this even more significant is the credibility of those coming forward. People who knew Meghan before fame, before titles, before reason to exaggerate, are putting their reputations on the line. Pretty went public, identifying herself and stating, "This is what I was told, what we discussed, what I know from our friendship." When these claims are combined with timeline inconsistencies, biological impossibilities, and other misaligned details, a pattern emerges. A pattern suggesting the pregnancy stories we've seen might not fully reflect reality. Could these sources be mistaken? Misremembering? Possibly. Memory isn't perfect. But these aren't vague recollections. They involve specific procedures, terminology, and discussions about real reproductive challenges.
Harry's book, the biography, I mean, that's going to be devastating for the royal family because that's the only way that Harry can make his income.
Is there another explanation? Could endometriosis have improved? Could previous issues have resolved? From a biological perspective, endometriosis doesn't usually vanish, and a hysterectomy, if performed, is irreversible. These conditions don't spontaneously heal. So we're left with a puzzle. Sources describing serious reproductive obstacles long before royal life, then suddenly two pregnancies occurring quickly and seemingly easily after marriage. When you compare this with the biological background, and note that these individuals haven't recanted or claimed misunderstanding, it raises questions. They continue standing by their statements despite scrutiny and potential backlash, apparently valuing truth over comfort. Now, let's look at an incident where doubt reportedly arose within the relationship itself. According to sources, a specific moment during the 2018 Australia tour revealed cracks in the story. Multiple staff described the tour as tense, not the usual nervous energy of royal events, but something heavier and uncomfortable. Last-minute schedule changes, sudden demands, and shifting priorities disrupted the planned flow. The most striking moment reportedly occurred behind closed doors. Several staff overheard a heated exchange where he allegedly asked a question no husband should have to ask. "Are you pregnant?" Think about the meaning in context. It wasn't a hopeful question spoken in joy. It was said with tension, confusion, and concern over the accuracy of information he'd been given. Staff explained the argument stemmed from Meghan announcing her condition on the tour without approval. Royal protocol typically requires coordination for such announcements, press offices to inform family and strategic planning. But the news came suddenly, unexpectedly, turning his tour into a different experience. Witnesses say Harry didn't appear joyful or excited. He seemed strained and distracted, not the typical reaction of someone celebrating impending fatherhood. Why does this matter? Because even he reportedly questioned the situation himself. What was he noticing that prompted that serious question?
And Harry and Meghan looked as if they were quite angry that they weren't being treated with the respect they think they deserve.
Husbands don't usually question whether their wives are pregnant unless something feels wrong, unless details don't line up, unless doubts have been building quietly. The timing matters here. This wasn't late-stage concern about health or complications. It was early. A basic question: are you actually expecting? Not worry, but verification. Staff who witnessed the tension described an atmosphere they'd never seen on royal tour before. Communication issues, sudden mood changes, and a heavy feeling under the surface that no one openly addressed but everyone sensed. What makes this moment especially important is that it wasn't outsider speculation. It was reportedly seen by staff working directly with the couple, people with no motive to invent stories, who simply observed private moments revealing more than intended. That alleged question doesn't stand alone. It sits alongside everything else we've discussed. Biological issues, timelines that don't fit, childhood friends talking about fertility struggles, reactions from women whose real experiences didn't match the public story, and now, a moment where even he reportedly questioned what was happening. None of these points prove anything on their own, but together, they form a pattern where the public story doesn't align with what may have been happening privately. And the fact this occurred during a time meant to be joyful makes it even more significant. If doubt existed at the announcement stage, when certainty should have been absolute, what does that say about the foundation? Australia becomes the moment where the polished public image reportedly cracked. Behind closed doors, away from cameras, something unfiltered surfaced. A husband asking if what he'd been told was true. Those few words carry weight across the entire timeline. Because if he needed confirmation, then maybe the questions everyone else is asking aren't unreasonable. Now we reach the most controversial part of this puzzle. This is where things move beyond timelines and biology into names, locations, and claims placed on public record. A mother in Costa Rica came forward openly. She didn't hide her identity. She shared a detailed account involving Meghan and her own daughter. According to her testimony, Meghan hired her daughter to appear as Lilibet in photographs, not as a playmate, not as a companion, specifically to pose as the royal child for the camera.
She would never put herself above the monarchy, which of course was the downfall of Meghan in Britain, that she wanted.
She claims an agreement was made, photos were taken, but payment never arrived. Compensation was promised but never delivered. More importantly, she insists no other children were present with the couple during their stay. Not hidden, not briefly seen, simply not there. So if her daughter was hired to appear as Lily and no other children were present, who exactly was being photographed? Her account continues, stating the couple left earlier than planned and left their hotel bill unpaid. These weren't vague accusations. She provided dates, locations, and financial details that could be checked. Then people began closely examining the photos themselves. Observers noticed something odd. The child in those images didn't resemble other photos released of Lilibet. Different facial structure, different features. Not differences explained by lighting or angles, but clear physical inconsistencies. That alone raised questions. But then came another layer involving documentation. Screenshots circulated showing an official palace statement about Archie claiming he was born via surrogate. People said they saw it live, captured it, and shared it. Then another screenshot surfaced. Same wording, one major difference. The listed location changed. One said Kensington Palace, the other said Frogmore Cottage. Two versions of what should have been a single official statement. Buckingham Palace never addressed either. No clarification, no explanation, just silence. Now all these elements converge. A mother claiming her child was hired for staged photos, visual inconsistencies in released images, conflicting official statements with no response, all involving children who should have clear, verifiable birth records. These aren't questions about privacy. They're questions about basic facts. Why hire a child to pose? Why do statements exist in two versions? Why no clarification? Everything we've covered leads here. Biological barriers suggesting natural pregnancy was unlikely. Math that doesn't work. Childhood friends describing fertility obstacles. A husband reportedly questioning reality, and first-hand experiences that didn't match the public narrative.
I'm of the understanding that Harry and Meghan didn't really give them enough time to really even clear those diaries.
Now we're at the witnesses describing hired children and conflicting documentation. None of these pieces exist on their own. They weave together into a web of inconsistencies pointing to one central question. If the pregnancies weren't as reported, if medical details don't hold up, if timelines don't make sense, and if documents contradict each other, then asking questions about these kids isn't cruel. It's necessary. When inconsistencies build like this, when people come forward, when documents exist in multiple unexplained versions, inquiry isn't optional, it's required. Let's bring it all together. Step back, look at the full picture. Each piece starts to form a pattern that can't be ignored. It began with the miscarriage story. A hospital scene during lockdown that couldn't have happened, a burial beneath a tree that didn't grow there, remains released despite protocol, a partner present when rules forbade it. Then the timeline, July 2020 to a full-term baby 11 months later. Math that refuses to work. Recovery periods, conception windows, full gestation. Nothing fits the timeline. Experts weighed in, pointing out biological facts don't match claims, and that attributing pregnancy loss to stress spreads harmful misinformation. Thousands who experienced similar losses responded, saying the public account felt theatrical, not authentic. Logistics didn't match reality. Childhood friends spoke up about past reproductive challenges, endometriosis, egg freezing, and procedures making natural conception extremely difficult or impossible. These people risked reputations to share their accounts. Then there was Australia, staff witnessing tension, a heated exchange where he reportedly asked if she was actually pregnant, questioning fundamental information during what should have been joyful times. And finally, Costa Rica, a mother stating her daughter was hired for photos, visual inconsistencies in images, documents existing in multiple contradictory versions, palace statements that should have been straightforward but weren't. Each element alone could be dismissed, a misremembered detail, a timeline off by a month, a past conversation misinterpreted, but stacked together.
Writer, and it'll be filled with vitriol and filled with lies. I mean, she will not tell the truth because you want sensational headlines.
Biological realities, timeline failures, childhood accounts, professional concerns, even the husband reportedly questioning reality, witnesses with specific claims and contradictory official records form a pattern, not random misunderstandings. At the center is one unavoidable question. Who is Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor? This isn't asked out of malice or for entertainment. Nothing in the surrounding narrative adds up. Biological realities clash with calendars. Documents contradict each other. Witnesses dispute official accounts. Inquiry becomes essential. These children are allegedly in line for royal succession. Their existence, parentage, and legitimacy aren't private. They are matters of public record, historical documentation, and lineage affecting the monarchy itself. Yet the records have gaps, inconsistencies, and unanswered concerns raised by professionals, childhood friends, witnesses, and investigators combing publicly available information. Puzzles like this don't vanish when people stop talking. They linger quietly until someone pulls the right thread, unraveling the entire story. Tom Bower has started pulling threads. Others are observing, examining details perhaps meant to be accepted without question. With each inconsistency revealed, with each witness stepping forward, the picture becomes clearer. The story isn't ending, it's only beginning. Reality has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply buried. And whatever the truth is about Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor, it could rewrite not just her story but the entire Sussex legacy. The questions aren't going away. If anything, they're multiplying. Somewhere in all these biological conflicts, witness accounts, and timeline failures, the real story is waiting to emerge. Backhand index pointing down. What's your take on all of this? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to FameX with notifications on so you don't miss any updates as this investigation unfolds. The story is far from over.